All right, good morning everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar, The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Your Marketing Technology Stack. Before we get started, I wanted to call attention to the Questions tab on your screen. Please feel free to use this feature anytime throughout the presentation, and we'll address as many as we can at the end. I'd like to now go ahead and introduce today's presenter. Adam Corey is VP of Marketing at Tealium, and as expected, he leads Tealium's marketing efforts and is responsible for driving awareness and education around tag management and customer data management. Adam has over 13 years of experience in digital analytics, marketing, and business development. For those of you not yet familiar, Tealium is a leader in real-time customer data solutions. The company's customer data platform includes a tag management solution, omni-channel segmentation and action engine, and a suite of data services powering compelling omni-channel customer experiences. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Adam.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everybody for joining us today. So I realize this is a bit of maybe an unconventional topic for a webinar, but I thought it would make sense to spend today's brief presentation to talk a bit about, as marketers, what we tend to do is add. We add, either new vendors, or we're tasked with new campaigns or audiences or ways that we want to have a conversation with new consumers. And as a result, we accumulate a lot of new data and a lot of what I would call technical baggage that can sometimes slow us down, or to borrow from today's inspiration, maybe zap some of the joy in what we do in our own careers and how we like to approach building amazing customer experiences and engaging our customers. So we often start with a great, brilliant idea about how we could launch a new program or engage someone in a new and delightful way. But then reality sometimes sets in, and we're daunted by the technical limitations or the cost and resources required to get a new idea off the ground. So perhaps we water down our idea or abandon it or evolve it to something that might be a bit easier or more feasible. So the idea for this webinar really came from what I would like to say is a moment away from work, where I was reading The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo and thinking really about how I could clean up my own personal life and my belongings and my house and be much more efficient and joyful in my own life. But as I was reading it, and maybe because I'm a workaholic, I really was thinking so much about how the ideas in this book really parallel to my own understanding of what we do as marketers and as customer insights professionals. We tend to collect and store data about what people are doing because that's really the nature of our business. And we're never really taught or thought about what we could be doing as how to tidy up the marketing stack, because there's never really a vendor or a strategy that pushes us to do so. But as we do collect more and build more, we tend to slow down, or we have more hurdles that we have to go through to actually build our strategies as a result. So with that, I wanted to spend today's conversation talking about three main areas. One, how we tend to get cluttered with our own marketing stack and the data that surrounds it. Three, actionable steps that we can approach so as we look at customer data, it doesn't continue to build clutter, build duplications. And three, how we can work with new technologies and vendors to help keep us moving forward as opposed to bogging us down. So with that, let's talk a little bit about how we tend to get cluttered in the first place. I'm going to borrow a couple quotes here throughout that really sparked this particular conversation today. And I think the first thing that we look at is focusing on what we really want to know about our customers and what we really want to do, as opposed to not necessarily looking at what's in our stack and what's in our arsenal today. So let's pause for a moment and take a step back in time to what the MarTech landscape looked like just a few short years ago. And while this was a lot, there were certainly far fewer technologies out there than there were today. And this is intentionally hard to read, I think. But what I think is really important here from this great chart that comes from chiefmartech.com is there are thousands of companies now, over 3,000, that provide some really great value that helps us do new things with our customers, do new things with our marketing campaigns and initiatives, but they're each solving an individual problem. And we tend to add them on over time. And over time, we've accumulated quite a bit, and because we're all busy and we're all building and moving forward, we often don't have a chance to take a step back and think about what our entire MarTech stack looks like and the customer data that flows through them. So as a result, we did a couple of studies over the last few years, and we've looked at what marketers are actually using today. And not only have we seen an increase between 2012 and 2015 with the number of vendors that marketers use to make up their stack, it's actually increasing. So 21 plus vendors are used by the majority of businesses out there, and these are the 21 plus different technologies that power everything throughout the customer experience, from email to analytics to on-site personalization and experimentation. You can imagine that the list gets pretty long for a lot of us. And with each one of these vendors, we're actually creating more data, we're creating duplications of that data, and we're creating new understandings about our customers and new profiles as a result. Because each one of these vendors is typically implemented on its own. So it's implemented via maybe a tag on a website or an individual implementation so that we can get that solution live. And we often don't think about how I can connect what works in one solution or what I know about somebody in one solution to every other vendor out there to help create that great, wonderful omnichannel experience. This actually makes omnichannel harder. If I have data that starts in one place and then it's sent off to 21 different places, it's really hard for me to go back the other way and try to create a compelling experience that follows someone throughout their journey. So as we're trying to solve this, we've surveyed our customers also at the end of last year to see what are you doing moving forward into 2016, and we found that a lot of people are looking to expand what they're doing from a data perspective and adding resources and people as a result. But when we also look at other data out there from surveys of marketers, we've found that 92% of the marketers out there say that they have not yet achieved a multi-channel reality, or really the goal of engaging our customers fluidly across all channels. And that's really what we're all trying to do. As consumers have changed the game a bit and they're looking to interact with us regardless of channel and experience, they're looking to get a seamless experience across all channels. We as marketers and as brands really need to make sure that we can be agile enough to accommodate that change in customer behavior. So let's talk a little bit about this typical approach to working with data and working with vendors. So let's say I want to track an experience that happens on a website. So a customer takes an action, they add something to a shopping cart, or they read something, or they purchase something. That data is usually collected in an analytics solution or another data solution, and then I can understand it, report on it, and then hopefully take action on that, but usually only in the solutions that maybe are integrated with that analytics solution or that I've hard-coded onto my website itself. And so this means that if I have a new great idea for the way that I might want to engage a consumer, I then usually need to invest in additional development time, additional integration time, and that could mean time and money that maybe I don't have to spend. So I kind of view this as the old TV VCR, for those of you on the phone that remember a VCR. If I'm coupled with my data and my segmentation and my action all together, I sometimes am limited with where I can go from a future standpoint. So let's say I want to add a bigger television screen, or I want to add Netflix to my TV. Do I need to buy another solution because both the data about my customers and my ability to take action are all within one application? And so to become a bit more 2016 about maybe let's leave the VCR reference behind for a moment. One of the approaches that we'll talk about in a moment is abstracting or removing the data from one particular application or vendor to a more vendor-neutral data approach, so that I can work with any vendors and any technologies that can take action and work with and build a better customer experience. This also, as a great result, will reduce the data inconsistencies and duplicated data and maybe incomplete data that I have in those 21 plus vendors that I work with, because I'm starting from a centralized approach to working with customer data and implementations. So let's move into a few of the different ways that we can work with data moving forward so that it doesn't really consume me and doesn't bog me down. All of the things You want to own, all of the things you own want to be of use to you. This is a great quote that actually reminded me of a CMO that I worked with years ago that said when someone's on your website, they're raising their hand by their activities. They're telling you that they have certain preferences, what they like, what they don't like, and they're trying to communicate to you. But if you can't listen to them and you can't actually interact with them and engage them and understand what they're saying, if that signal is hidden in all the noise, then you're not able to do your job as a marketer or a customer insights professional. And I think that's one of the most important concepts that we sometimes lose sight of when we're trying to engage our customers, is what are they trying to tell us and what is the data trying to tell us so that I can create that best experience possible. So of the three ways that I think we need to approach working with data, one of the most important first steps is, as a digital professional, is to establish the concept of a data layer. So without a data layer, you typically have your website, your applications, your customer experience touch points, and then you have somebody that's implemented code somewhere that gets whatever a particular vendor needs routed onto them. There's usually not a centralized approach to it, and how this is approached is, let's say I have an analytics vendor that needs to collect 30 or 40 different data points, and so I have a developer that goes to my website and figures out where those 30 or 40 different data points are and implements them via code to get them onto the analytics vendor. And then a few days later, we implement a new ad tracking technology, and they need to be implemented on a few pages. I call that developer back up and say, hey, I need you to go ahead and add this particular implementation to these pages, and oh, by the way, they need a few data points as well, such as product ID and order total. So I tend to approach that individually. If you think back to the 21 plus vendors that I might use, I probably approach this at least 21 different ways over the lifetime. But establishing the concept of a data layer that's neutral and abstracted away from the individual vendors or individual implementation actually brings some order to that chaos. So a data layer itself is the description of what's going on a particular page, a particular event, or a particular experience. And so if you think about a product page, for example, this is going to describe all of the product attributes, the product name, the SKU, the price, the quantity, the color, follows throughout the entire experience. A page that I'm on, what is the name of this page, who is the author of this page, what category does this fit into? When I build a data layer that describes what's going on in this experience, without necessarily thinking about what a particular vendor needs first, but I think about what's happening on this page and how do I describe it, I start from already a cleaner place from a data perspective. I'm starting with how I want to best describe this page, and then separately I can worry about how I want to map that into what a particular vendor needs. So if I have a product name and a vendor needs that product name, as opposed to having to chase down a developer to try to find how to implement this solution, if I have a common data layer that's established across the entire web or mobile experience, I can then choose from that great list of attributes that are available and pick and choose the ones that make the most sense for this vendor. It also makes sense if I want to join together or add different elements together, add maybe page ID and page name together for a variable in my analytics vendor. Great, I can do anything that I want because I have a clean starting place of data in that data layer. This really gives me, since it's a vendor neutral approach, it really allows me to not only implement vendors more quickly, but it also gives me more value out of the individual vendors and technologies that I use. So if you think about why that's possible, oftentimes when we go to implement a vendor or implement a new technology, we're going to do whatever we need to do in that moment to get our current initiatives live. We are thinking, as much as we don't like to, we sometimes think in the short term about how we can get a solution live. But in the long term, there might be a lot more that a particular vendor could do if we made more data available to them. So having a full list of great data to start with then allows me to pull from that list and in less time, because I don't have to go and ask that developer to hunt and find individual variables and data points, but I have a great data layer established, I can go ahead and implement those solutions more quickly, but also implement them with more data. And usually usually when I have more data available to a vendor, they're able to get more value out of their own features and functionality. Because if they know more about a product that I'm interested in as a consumer, that much likely going to give the ability to have a more relevant or targeted experience in that particular vendor's expertise. So the next step, which I really view as a building block on top of the data layer itself, is to centralize all of my customer data, again, in a vendor-neutral way. So if I think about for a moment the data layer as the concept that describes what's happening on this event, on this page, at this moment, I can use that as the building block to help describe a particular user or visitor or customer that I have. If I'm looking in my data layer at a particular product and I describe that product a certain way, if this customer tends to view multiple products, I can then use those data layer elements to help describe that person. So that person, let's say he's viewed 4 products, that person has now viewed multiple products. Okay, so now I know something about that customer in a new way. He's browsing particular products on my site. But are there other pieces of information in that data layer that particular user or customer is interacting with that could tell me a bit more? Well, are they browsing certain types of products? Is there a certain brand or certain sizes? If there's a size that I tend to browse most often, then I might decide that, there's a new element that describes this customer as their preferred size. Maybe he's a medium. Maybe he has a preference with a particular brand or other attribute. When I have the starting place of a great data layer, I can use that as the building block to help describe what my customer is and then communicate the data about that customer to all of those 21 plus different technologies. And how this is a bit different than the first approach that we started out with earlier on in the presentation is if I make these decisions at the central point and then distribute that on to each of my 21 plus vendors, all of them can know that this person is interested in this particular brand, size, and is actively shopping but hasn't yet purchased, for example, as opposed to relying on each of those 21 different vendors to draw the same conclusions. Because if you think about it, not every vendor is going to have the same visibility in the old approach. They do when they all share a common data layer and a common definition of my customer data. So I'd love to take an example of the two of these in practice, and this is really from my own life as a consumer, and looking at that idea of an individual user raising their hand to tell you something about them. A little while ago, I was searching for a flight, and searching for a flight from San Diego to Australia. And that's a long flight, it's an expensive flight, and I really want to make sure that I'm getting the best value as possible. So typically a scenario might be I would be targeted by this particular booking engine or airline if I don't purchase this particular airfare. And they might send me an email to say, hey, don't forget to go ahead and buy this particular airfare that you abandoned. But if there are other pieces of data that are either available in the data layer or have been used in the data layer to help describe me as a person, that engagement that I could have via email or other channels could be a bit more targeted and a bit more relevant to who I am. So let's say I take an action, which I did, which is to sort by price. So I want to sort by lowest to highest price. This is telling this airline or booking engine a bit more about me either as a person or a bit more about me in this particular scenario, which is I'm probably price sensitive. So if that's a new piece of information that I could then uncover and do something with, I might better engage the consumer with language and promotions that target the idea of this person is price sensitive either in general because of the number of times that they've sorted by price or in this particular context they're sensitive to the price. Or maybe I'm not. This is not the case, but I thought for illustrative purposes I would say that I was looking for a refundable airfare. But let's say I had a bit more money and I was just looking to value my time and flexibility over price. So if I then chose the refundable option, that would really change the language as well to then say, hey, this particular consumer is not really as concerned about price, but they might need to change their trip for some reason. So maybe I need to promote some of the advantages of refundable fares, including that I can change my ticket all I want, or maybe I get a better seat or a nicer seat. This wouldn't really be possible if I didn't have the ability to work with that data on its own in a more centralized way. And when I do start with a centralized data foundation and a centralized understanding of who somebody is, it really allows me to get creative as a marketer with engaging someone regardless of channel and regardless of approach. So I can really look at what are the individual things that I know about a consumer, the badges maybe that describe them or the attributes, and then I can create a journey across all of my different vendors that make up the omni-channel experience for this customer. The third is to really design for change and design for teams. If you think about the benefit of abstracting out this particular data from one particular vendor or technology, I not only avoid that TV VCR combo problem, but I can also make it available and valuable to other teams, which means that if multiple vendors can share the same common definition and nomenclature and understanding of who somebody is, that means that my other teams can do so as well. And I think when teams can actually work together, they're actually able to solve problems and identify opportunities and efficiencies across the board. We often get confused, I think, when we think about the idea of centralized data and we think we've accomplished this or on the path to accomplish this when we've stored data. But I think in reality, we're not really doing ourselves or our teams any good if we haven't made that data accessible to all of my teams and technologies and vendors and made it accessible in real time. And that's the approach of having a customer data platform or a common data supply chain that's shared across all teams, because I can actually look at the data that's been collected and the value that exists within it, and I can act upon it. And this then not only allows my teams to work together, but it's also going to allow me to embrace change, which we all know is continuing to happen with either new channels or devices that I might need to engage my consumer on, new ideas or initiatives that my company might have, as well as changes to consumer behavior, or even changes to the way that I need to handle customer data as well. So if I have a centralized approach and not 21 different approaches, this gives me the ability to adapt for the long term. So as a quick review of this section, and I love this picture because I think it sometimes encapsulates the problem that we sometimes face. If we establish a centralized vendor-neutral approach, this then gives me the ability to free up the data so that it's not being hoarded or collected by just one person, but it's freed up and accessible to all of the solutions and teams and technologies that our company invests in. So that way I can foster and really establish more of a cross-team cooperation, so that way one person doesn't have the best understanding of the consumer experience at the detriment of other teams and other channels. So the next step that I wanted to go into were 3 of the ways that we can continue to work with the vendors that make up our ecosystem so that we don't keep repeating the same mistakes or the same setbacks moving forward. So the first, and I think this is really something that we've seen change quite a bit in the last few years for the better, is that there are more vendors out there that are open to bringing in data from other channels. And so I think as B2B consumers or marketers, it's our responsibility to look at what vendors are open and reward that openness, because as we think about how customers are changing their preferences and how they like to interact with us, we need to be able to adapt to that at a more rapid pace. We need to be more agile. And so vendors that can embrace importing data from a centralized customer experience initiative or customer data platform, this is really going to help me for the long term. This also has the ability for me to approach my vendors in a different way. And so this I really call de-risking my implementation strategy. You know, it's funny, Telium has its roots in the idea of tag management, which helps me implement vendors in a shorter period of time, because I've established a data layer, I've established a common data foundation, so I can implement solutions more easily. But we really haven't changed the way that we buy or evaluate the solutions, I think, as a result. So while most consumers of a tag management solution are able to implement a new technology on their website or elsewhere in a fraction of the time, they still engage with the vendor the same way. And if you think about how large that chief MarTech landscape was with the thousands of companies that are there, it's clear that if the same vendors work for every single business and every single marketer out there, that landscape would not be as big. There would only be one marketing cloud. It would be very simple, but it's not, because different vendors and different technologies and approaches work differently for every company. And so two ways to approach looking at new technologies, either that maybe you don't have as much experience with or maybe are newer to your particular organization, is to test them. And one way would be to actually run an A/B split test to see if I've reduced the amount of implementation effort that it takes to get something live. Why don't I split up my particular website or experiences on my website or another customer property for, let's say, a retargeting vendor, and give half of my visitors to one retargeting vendor and the other half to another to see which one provides the greater lift. Not all technologies are going to work that same way, where they can actually have a concurrent test going. But since I have reduced the amount of energy that it takes to implement something, I can approach vendors from a crawl, walk, run perspective, which is to test particular functionality that's of importance to me, and then grow that implementation over time once I've determined that there's a good fit with my business, my customers, and my long-term strategy. The third area to think about is when I'm building my marketing technology stack, or I'm evaluating what's in my stack, do I need to continue to build a garage full of Escalades? Do I need the absolute cream of the crop, all the features fully loaded, everything I ever wanted in every single channel? Or is it a bit more nuanced than that? And should I look a little bit more critically at what features really matter to my business the most? And I think this really becomes interesting. I don't mean to pick on email vendors at all, but I do think it's an interesting example to look at. If I were to select an email vendor today, maybe there are three different types. There's one that is a little more transactional, maybe a bit more developer-focused, offers open APIs. The second maybe has some basic segmentation capabilities and also has some open APIs. And the third is my Escalade. It has all sorts of features and ways to slice and dice customers up, as well as open APIs. Without having a centralized approach to customer data, I would probably, if money wasn't an object, I would probably get rid of the first two options, and I would go with my Escalade, no questions. But if I have now centralized my data and my segmentation strategy, so I have an understanding of who somebody is, what they're browsing particularly, what they like, what I know about them historically, I need to then drill in a bit deeper into this particular evaluation to say, hey, they all offer some openness here and they all offer open APIs. Maybe I can make some choices based on what's right for my business, based on the skill set of my team members, what features are most important for my business, and can I grow and expand this and change this over time? So really similar in some ways to approaching a testing and evaluation of vendor. I then need to see, are there changes to the way that I approach vendors from the way that I've done this historically if I don't need them all to provide the same functionality from a segmentation standpoint or elsewhere. So to summarize here, what we look at is when we centralize data and have a vendor-neutral approach, this removes the duplication and incomplete data and really the blind spots that exist out there with the vendors in my mix. And if I have the ability to reduce the amount of time that it takes to implement and support an implementation process for a vendor, it allows me to test and evaluate vendors in a very different way, and actually moves the power back into the marketer's hands to find the right vendor mix that's going to support the long-term goals and strategies of your company and what works best for your team. And finally, we do find that companies experience cost savings when I've reduced the duplication of functionality and the duplication of data across all of my channels, teams, and technologies when I share a common approach to data across the board. We do have time, I think, for one question, which I'll go ahead and read here. while we wrap up. And the idea is, can the CRM take the role of a customer data store? And I think this is a really interesting approach. If I have access to a particular set of data, there are usually a couple different questions that I need to ask of that data set. One, does it have the complete rich picture, or can it have the complete rich picture of everything that describes my customers, as well as maybe my unknown visitors as well? Sometimes we don't see that in traditional CRM solutions, but that's an important thing to ask is, can I get a full understanding before someone is a known entity, they have a name and an email address, so that I can act on them. So it's important to know both the known and the unknown, to have a concept of both, but also to follow one of the points that I brought up earlier in the conversation is, are they accessible across my teams and across every technology that I'd want to evaluate, both now and in the future? So do they offer those integration options, and do they offer those integration options in a real-time approach? I think that's an important thing for us to think about as we evaluate where our customer and our segmentation strategy resides. Does it sit in one place, or does it sit in a neutral place that can serve all of the applications and technologies that I need? So thank you very much for your questions. We can continue the conversation on Twitter if you have questions or other thoughts about this. We'll also follow up with some additional reading materials to continue the conversation based on today's webinar, but you're always welcome to download white papers directly from our website, tealium.com. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a great day.